Right, so an ecological niche is influenced, and it's really heavily determined by the way an organism interacts with all of the things around it, right? And that's biotic and abiotic factors. So many of the interactions we'll be familiar with when we're talking about species interactions. You would have heard them from junior years, so all of these different ones we are going to speak about. So we'll start with competition, and we've spoken a lot about competition in terms of competition for resources in an ecological niche. We need to also consider that organisms in competition with one another, they do require the same resources to survive. It's just a simple, it's going to happen. Now, competition can be between different species, or it can be between members of the same species. And we've talked about that competitive exclusion idea in terms of, if there's populations sharing the same area, maybe they're out competing each other for the same resource. So the classic example that we saw of that were the barnacles, spoken in the last video. But, we're going to see lots of different types of competition along the way. All right, predation is one of the most common and obvious interactions in an ecosystem. It's where the predator organism kills prey and consumes it. Now, predators will have multiple types of prey. They have to diversify to ensure that they're going to survive. If you only eat one type of food and it disappears, sadly, you're going to die as well. So the dynamic between the predator and the prey will fluctuate as the population numbers change. So if population of the predators increases, then they're going to need to eat more of the prey, so the prey numbers will fall and vice versa. Now, predators can be natural, or they can even be introduced into an ecosystem. For example, the cane beetle was introduced into Australia to control the cane toad was brought into Australia to control the cane beetle, which was a native beetle which attacked sugarcane plantations, which were also introduced. So herbivore, I can never say that. We're talking about a special kind of predation where an animal is consuming a plant or a producer organism. All right, symbiosis is a general term for a close and long-term interaction between two species. It's usually considered those interactions where at least one species benefits. So these are the three we're going to put under this umbrella. Some of these, again, you will have seen before in junior. All right, parasitism is occurring when one organism lives inside or on another species, causing it harm. Really common ones are disease-causing agents in humans like malaria or even those types of worms. But we can also talk about ectoparasites like ticks and fleas. Now, in the animal world, there's plenty of examples of that as well. This is a super gross example. The cabbage white caterpillars, they have a natural parasite, and there's a native wasp. And it parasitizes the caterpillar by laying its eggs inside the caterpillar's body, and then the eggs hatch and the wasps eat the caterpillar from the inside out. All right, commensalism is where organisms are living together, where one is benefiting and the other is really, neither harmed or unharmed. It doesn't really mind, it's carrying on with its life. Cattle egrets eat the insects stirred up by cattle when they're grazing. The remora fish gather the scraps from sharks when they eat. And lichens, they're a really interesting concept. Now, firstly, they live on trees and they don't harm the tree in any way, but lichens themselves are a kind of symbiotic organism. They are a fungus and an algae or a cyanobacterium living together. And so that in itself is a symbiotic relationship. Now, interestingly, the fungi benefits because it's taking the carbohydrates that the photosynthetic organism it's living with is making, but also the algae is benefiting because it is being protected by the fungus as well. But this is an example of mutualism. All right, and mutualism is where the organisms that live together, both of them are benefiting. Now, this is a really strange one, but it is a lovely Australian example where quandongs are being eaten by emus and the seeds are not processed, so they come out in the bird's droppings and the seeds will then continue to grow because the droppings work as fertilizer. So the emu is getting food and the plant is being able to seed disperse essentially and live in different areas. Right, there's also nitrogen-fixing bacteria living in legume root nodules, which we've spoken about before, and that is essentially helping out the nitrogen cycle. The bacteria are getting protection in that microhabitat and the plant are getting a ready supply of nitrates. Insects and birds pollinating one another, they come for the nectar, right? They transfer the pollen to other environments, once again, to allow the plant to continue its growth. Amensalism is a type of interaction where one organism is harmed or inhibited or even killed by the presence of another living in their normal niche. So it's just one organism carrying on with its life and the other one is completely harmed. So antibiosis is a version of this where it's a process where fungus naturally produces an antibiotic. So Penicillium is the fungus that penicillin, the antibiotic, comes from. And so if you grow it around bacteria, it has a naturally antibacterial property, so it will just kill it, essentially. A black walnut secretes a similar kind of chemical, and it's a substance that destroys many plants that live within its root system. All right, disease is a tricky one. So it's essentially similar to parasitism, but one organism is benefiting and one is harmed. So consider a bacterial or a fungal infection. It's living within a host organism to benefit from the moist, nutritious environment, but it is indeed causing harm. So it's similar to Amensalism there. A bacteria can live outside the host organism, so it's less of a parasite, okay? But it still utilizes the host's mechanisms and nutrients. So disease is a bit of a grey area to classify. It sits somewhere between parasitism and Amensalism. Right, this is our subject matter. Remember, it's only a small point up here, but quite a lot to remember.